like people were pulled over on the side of the road, and I'm like, I've got a team meeting. I gotta be there. No,
Get out of my way.
Right. I'll tell you, there was a couple times in the military, we call it Tucker Factor 0, where I was passing a semi, and like they were splashing with fun. I was like, oh my God, we'll see what happens here. But I'm about ready to go down in a hail of crazy rain, but no, get it down. It's good because today's team meeting is actually super important for several reasons. We have a lot of new forms coming down the pipeline, and when do they take effect?
Can I have one of those?
Technically August.
Do you have
No,
another?
right now you can't. I'll get you one.
Yeah.
So I printed off 2 copies of the purchase agreements. Are getting passed around, and I'm going to focus on really 2. I'm going to focus on 2 forms because, believe it or not, there are changes being made to or forms being created to a total of 24. 24 forms are affected. Look at Renee's face. Look at my 24 forms are affected, and that's just residential. That doesn't even include the commercial changes. So here's what I'll say to preface all this, because I'll be the first one to admit that the last time changes came out, especially that inspection didn't change, I was like, what was the form? But were they smoking doobies in the forms community, or what was going on here? What were they thinking? But what I've since learned is there's nothing we can do about it. You got to learn the changes. You have to embrace them. And I think the ones to the PA, you'll actually probably be supportive on the whole. So we're going to talk through those. If you could please continue to pass those around once you've had a chance to look at them. So without further ado, I'm sorry it's going to be kind of forms heavy this meeting, but hopefully if you're anything like me, I was geeking out, this morning, reading through this stuff, learning all the different changes and thinking about how I'm going to have to deal with them or incorporate them into our respective businesses. So the first one we're going to look at is a pretty easy change, although it's kind of a creepy one, all right? It has to do with the change to the listing contract exclusive right to sell. And we're going to go almost immediately to page 3. In lines 100 through 103, let me turn the lights off so you guys can see a little bit better. So this section right here says recording on the property. Recording on the property. So those of you that have sellers that are kind of creepy and really weird and like to record people when they come into their house for showings.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'll pick up. Oh yeah, now I know what you're talking about. I've done it myself. No, just good. Recording on the property. Seller understands that state law specifically prohibits the interception of oral communications without the consent of at least one of the 2 parties to the communication. Sellers should seek appropriate legal advice regarding compliance with the state statute if the seller intends to utilize technology that may intercept oral communication between persons other than the seller. So a couple of takeaways. Can you just record? Like visually, can you just record? Absolutely, so long as there's no audio component.
Oh, okay.
So we can creep on people visually, okay? But you can't creep on them in terms of audio without their consent, because believe it or not, in the state of Minnesota, Renee, if I call you and we have a conversation, I can record that phone call. I don't need your permission to do so.
But you have to share it. And you have
Let's put the pause button in.
sorry.
Come on now. But here's the deal. If you and Lori are having a conversation, and I just happen to be, let's remember back in the day when you could pick up a phone, a landline, you could hear what people were talking about. Yeah, that's back in the day. If I were to pick up a phone, you 2 were talking and I recorded you, that would be illegal because I would be recording a conversation that neither of you gave me permission to record.
Right.
But if it's a conversation between you and I, if I give myself permission to, well, one of the parties has given permission, I can record that conversation in the state of Minnesota, okay? So don't go out, being James Bond in the state of Iowa trying to record people because you might get arrested. But suffice it to say, we've all heard of or know of sellers that leave recording devices in their homes during showings, right? Well, this is kind of saying, hey, if you choose to do that and somebody finds out about it, you might actually be breaking the law, and you could have to deal with some consequences. So word to the wise, bring it up. I would probably use this language during a listing appointment to let your clients know, hey, here's the deal. State law says it's illegal to record people during showings. I highly recommend that you don't do it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions on that one? Okay. So as I said before, there are changes or new forms to the tune of a total of 24 when it comes to residential stuff. Some of it's relatively minor.
Sal, I have a quick question.
Yes,
How are we supposed to ask them?
ask the money.
Well,
you know.
Would you
people
like to
have-
record people?
No.
Oh.
I'm saying, you know, people are kind of under the table with that, you know, cameras and things like that.
Absolutely,
And they don't want people to know that.
right.
Would it be appropriate for us to say, to get cameras that you're, you know, for safety, your security cameras or things like that, that you're gonna be, that you have installed in the home? I mean,
When you're sitting across the table
Yeah.
at a listing
Yeah.
appointment, I think that might be a fair statement, just to say, hey, you know, while we're on the topic, do you have any security,
Yeah.
video cameras or anything I should be aware of? What's really popular right now when you walk up to somebody's front door?
oh, Siri or whatever it
Doorbell.
is.
Yeah, the doorbell or ring, or there's so many different versions now where it will actually record you as soon as you push the doorbell, right? So just kind of cool. So you may or may not want to be aware of something like that, but I think as long as you have a conversation and you let people know that, hey, bottom line, the big takeaway is you can't just simply record people when they're coming and going to your home, from an audio standpoint, right? If for visual reasons, for security reasons, you want to be able to see what they're doing, well, this is telling you that you can do that. Well, I shouldn't say it's telling you that you can do that, but what it's only doing is it's only prohibiting the audio component of that. Because
So-
several people have security cameras on their properties, right?
I guess the right approach would be, you know, you guys have baby monitors or whatever.
Mhm.
I don't know if those audios are actually recorded, are they, on the baby monitors?
I'm sure there are some
Mhm.
that probably could be or are, but the majority of them probably are not.
So just, it's okay to do the visual, you know, the security systems except for the audio, just cut, I don't even know how they
Yeah.
work.
The bottom takeaway is, because this is what typically happens, people would take little voice recorders and they'll just hide them throughout the home
Right,
to get feedback, right?
Yeah.
This is telling you, probably not a good idea.
okay.
Yes, sir. Did I get it? Did I answer it for you? Okay. Okay, so what I said before is a 2 to 24 changes, either changes 2 forms or added new forms. But what I'm going to spend most time on is the purchase agreement, because that's the one that affects all of us almost immediately and has the biggest impact, right? So you'll notice the purchase agreement is now 12 pages long, okay? But before you freak out about that, the good news is the idea behind making it 12 pages is that it has now included things like the financing contingency addendums, as well as the closing costs addendum. So we're going to work our way through this. If you have some of the examples, continue to pass around, but I'm going to highlight some stuff and some changes, and then we'll kind of walk and talk through it. Just so you know, over the course of August, Bruce, Kelly, and myself will be putting on a series of classes all throughout the month to touch on these things, to answer questions and familiarize everybody with them. You know, don't panic about them. You know, embrace the new forms, start using them come August, and it's very much expected that you may or may not have some questions about some of these. So reach out, call us, and let's walk through them together. The good news is, because we're combining some forms, even though it's a change, it's really stuff you're already familiar with. It's just part of another form instead of its own separate form.
So is this August 1st that it's starting?
Correct.
So what happens if we go ahead and list a property, or if we can work before that on the old farm, or what do we do?
Yep, so anything that's done prior to August 1, you can go ahead and continue to utilize the forms that were in effect then. But if you are going to go ahead and take a new listing or write a new purchase agreement August 1st moving forward, you should be utilizing the new forms. Obviously, you're more than likely going to probably see a little bit of a grace period coming about between, you know, August, September, maybe even into October. But, you know, we prefer as an office to be on the leading edge of the change and embrace it by August 1. That being said, because this is what's going to happen. Some agents aren't even going to know about the change, right? Some agents aren't even going to know about it. Other agents are going to be sticklers about it, and you're going to be in multiple offer situations. You might submit an outdated form. They're going to kick it back to you, and oh, you're going to lose an offer. You're going to lose a property because you submitted it on an outdated form, right? So let's do right by ourselves and our clients, embrace these, and give us every reason to succeed with their offers rather than having stuff get kicked back for whatever reason. Because you all know that agent out there that'll be like, well, this is not the newest form, so blah, 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 somebody. So, purchase agreement, guess what? Some good news is, I think all the page numbering nonsense is kind of gone, which is good, because I used to kind of ignore that anyway. Don't tell my broker. But we're going to look toward the bottom of page 1. All right, already we're seeing a little bit of a significant change. Okay, purchase price. If you look at lines 37, I'm going to read bullet points 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we'll talk through those. This is what it says. Seller has agreed to sell a property to the buyer for the sum of blank, which buyer agrees to pay for in the following manner. Number 1, blank % of the sale price in cash. or more in the buyer's sole discretion, which includes the earnest money, right? So really, that's pretty common. We were already dealing with that. FHA 3.5% typically would go in there, or whatever percentage you wanted to. The nice added benefit to this, though, is blank percent of sale price in cash or more at the buyer's sole discretion. So right up front, the buyer is getting permission from the seller to put down even more than whatever percentage has been previously agreed to, right? The seller really shouldn't have an issue with that anyway, but sometimes, that could be a goofy sticking point. So hey, that's your minimum. You can put down some more if you want to at the buyer's sole discretion. Number 2, blank percent of the sale price in mortgage financing, and it says see the following mortgage financing section, which is now included in the purchase agreement. Number 3, blank percent of the sale price by assuming the seller's current mortgage. See attached addendum to purchase agreement, assumption financing. So if there plans to be any sort of assumption of mortgage, that will be a complete separate addendum that will take effect in addition to the PA. If it's just normal financing, nope, it's embedded in this. If it's an assumption, whole separate form. And the reason the association is trying to get ahead of the curve on assuming loans, does anybody know why or have an inkling as to why we might be doing that, or trying to get ahead of the curve on people assuming mortgages?
As rates go up.
Yeah, from the newbie. Look at you. All right, you must be coming to trainings or something. So tell me, what might happen?
Well, as rates go up, if you assume somebody's mortgage, you're gonna be at a lower rate.
Absolutely. We would all agree that interest rates right now are pretty historically unbelievable. They're crazy low, right? Well, over the next 3, 4, 5 years, we know and understand rates are very likely to start ticking back up. And right now, if you're closing on a home and your APR is, somewhere in the 4s, the low 4s, and 3 to 5 years from now, by the time you're closing on a loan, it's in the high 5s, maybe in the 6s. Well, all of a sudden, it might be attractive to somebody to assume that original loan and pay some in addition to secure a property, right? So I've been doing this for the better part of a decade. I've done zero assuming of loans, right? It's just not occurred. But as we move forward, based on what's happened historically, we can anticipate that we might start seeing assumption of loans as something that's more popular moving forward.
I haven't seen this loan for years.
Right.
So I'm not even sure if this is
Right.
gonna be a factor. Well, in
Right.
the future.
Well, yeah, because let me ask you, Leanne, what have interest rates been doing over the last few years?
Climbing up.
Yeah, but what have they been doing previous to that?
They're going down.
They were going down. Well, if I can buy a property at a 3% interest rate and the loan you have on it's at 5, why in the world would I ever assume that, right? But now as it starts to do the opposite, we might see it become more
So
popular.
lenders are gonna be all about assuming.
But think about it from the seller standpoint too. If you've got a sweet interest rate
Yeah.
on the loan to your property, all of a sudden that becomes an attractive asset that you can use to market the property. Hey, if you buy our home, we've got X amount percent of it already pulled out in a loan at a 3 or 4% interest rate. We're willing to allow you to assume that in addition to, paying the difference or getting a second loan to cover the difference. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, it has a potential to get a little bit more complicated, but the more we start familiarizing ourselves with it now, the more prepared we'll be to handle it in the future. So filter that away, just know it, be aware of it. We're probably not going to see any major changes to it in the immediate future, but down the road it's something that they've been talking about. Number 4, blank percent of the sale price by contract for deed. See attached addendum, purchase agreement, contract for deed financing. Okay, so everybody knows what contract for deed is. If there's any portion of it that's going to be financed via contract for deed, it's calling for it and saying it'll be on a separate addendum to the purchase agreement. Okay, so really, in all honesty, our big takeaway for this, for almost 99.9% of the deals we're going to be doing in the immediate future, really only blanks 1 and 2 are going to be applicable. All right, you've got 3 and 4 if you need them, but really 1 and 2 are the only ones that you're probably going to have to deal with. And if you're staying just within 1 and 2, you're not going to need another addendum when it comes to financing. All right, it's all going to be included within the purchase agreement. Then, of course, close date. Yes.
Is this gonna all be loaded into the transaction desk then?
So as far as Flex goes, that's on the association, and the association should be loading these new forms into Flex. Okay.
What about us?
As far as Dotloop goes,
No, our Keller Williams form in transaction.
you mean actual state contracts? They're already going to be there.
Transaction desk is Flex.
Yep. The
Right, well, but I meant
association.
under our KW form, you know
Yep.
what I'm saying?
Oh,
There's the Flex CMAR form.
Well, the KW forms that are just our forms won't be this stuff. That's not what
Right.
CMAR changes.
Let me put it to you this way, to solve,
They'll
to
be
answer your question. Yeah, if you go to transaction desk, the forms will be there.
Okay.
Yep, you might have to search for them, but they'll be there.
You do have to change your templates though. They will
Sure.
not automatically load into your template.
Yep.
And I've asked Sean numerous times and he said Flex cannot figure that out.
Well, I would imagine, I would hope that if you have any templates that are created with outdated forms, that those will just be gone, but who knows?
They're not, it keeps the old form in there.
Right, so what you're gonna have to
It's
do,
like you have them saved somewhere else.
right, so that's a good point, Jennifer. What you're likely gonna have to do is if you're somebody that uses templates quite a bit, you probably have to go and recreate some templates based on the new forms. I'm planning to do that. Or you just go without templates for the time being until you have time to create them for your individual accounts.
But the best thing about Flex is as soon as the new forms are available, the old forms are gone, so you can't use
Correct.
the wrong one.
Correct. So, and that's something we're gonna look to do in .loop as well, is pull out all the old stuff, so it's not even floating around in there. So if you see old forms floating around in there, let us know so we can get it removed. That just causes confusion. Okay, so we're gonna look to the next page, page 2. And you'll notice, what did we used to almost always go into right away after, page 1 of the PA is my favorite because it's really basically everything you needed to know, right? Here's what we're offering, here's earnest money, here's close date, right? Then we'll get to financing and all that. We used to go like right into property taxes and prorating this, that, and the other, blah, 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 is contingent upon sale of another property, this, that, and the other. But now all of a sudden we're changing gears and we're talking about mortgage financing right away within page 2 of the PA.
Mhm.
So mortgage financing is or is not subject to financing. And these are all the potential financing options that you would check as to whether or not this is a sort of financing you're utilizing. Not a huge change, right? This is not a huge change so far. We're just identifying what sort of financing the buyer intends to utilize or what combination of financing, right? Really no major change to what interest rate and, mortgage application and all that fun stuff. So not a huge change.
Hey, Zach, do you
Yes.
know on the MHFA, if they're getting down payment assistance from Minnesota Housing, are you supposed to check that box in addition to the FHA?
If it's there and they're using it, I would check it. And I would also have a conversation with your lender, and I would probably let the listing agent know, hey, this is why you're seeing this. Check out the financing addendum. They're using this down payment assistance program in addition to their FHA financing. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. You don't seem happy about that.
Well, because I was surprised, I was like, because you can check both, so I'm like, yeah, if somebody's getting the down payment assistance, you're probably supposed to check that, but it makes their offer look even worse, so.
Well, yes and no. I mean, if it's in multiples, potentially, but I think if you do a good job explaining it as you deliver the purchase agreement to the listing agent, you can hopefully probably alleviate that. Okay, so I want to actually spend some time discussing lines 67 through 110 because just last week I had 2 agents on separate deals call me and ask me questions about this, and we had to work through it. So we're going to spend some time discussing it real quick. Mortgage, financing, contingency. Okay, so really when we get to this part of the PA, we've got 2 options, right? Now let's summarize these 2 options as this. Either we're requiring a commitment letter or we're not, right? What's the first option? Option 1 is, are we requiring one or not?
Not.
We're not. First option is we're not, okay? The second option is we are gonna require a written commitment. Now, if you're a buyer, which of those 2 options do you kind of tend to favor potentially?
First.
Probably option 1. Now, if you're a listing agent and you get a PA and it's got option 1 checked, what do you do immediately? If you're the listing agent and a buyer's agent just submitted you this purchase agreement and it has the box by number 69 checked and refunded the buyer check, what do you typically do as a listing agent?
Approval letter for sure.
Usually what you do is you kick it back and say, it's gonna be the second option, and it's gonna be a commitment letter.
I've only got one, and you gotta stay
Never
on
done
top of
that.
that and make sure that you get it within a number of days.
Yeah, so let's have a discussion about that.
That you have to do.
Let's have a discussion about that then, because this just came back to bite the listing agent, not with our company. Okay, especially right now in the seller's market. I mean, it would be, so if you're representing the seller, which box do you like to see checked? Box 1 or box 2?
One.
If you're the seller.
If you're the
Oh,
seller,
seller.
you actually see
Oh,
box
seller.
2,
Seller too.
right? So if you're the listing agent, you represent the seller and it gets submitted to you and box 1 is checked, that shouldn't sit well with you, right? In theory, okay. So let's work through both of these boxes and find out how these actually play out in worst case scenario, right? Because oftentimes we check these boxes, we move forward, and it's not a big deal, right? We don't pay too much attention to it. So then when it becomes an issue, we're like, oh crap, I should probably go back and read that. Which one did we check and what does it actually mean? How does it actually play out, right? So we're gonna work through the first portion. This purchase agreement is contingent upon the following and applies to the first mortgage and any subordinate financing. Check 1. So the first option, if the buyer cannot secure the financing specified in this purchase agreement, and this purchase agreement does not close on the closing date specified, this purchase agreement is canceled. Buyer and seller shall immediately sign a cancellation and directing all earnest money be paid here to the buyer or the seller, right? Buyer usually will sometimes try to trick the buyer, the seller's going to kick it back and say, no, it should go to the seller, whatever. Whatever gets decided upon right there is a big deal, right? Because if the buyer can't close to the financing and it's checked to go to the seller, there's no argument there. Earnest money stays with the seller, it's retained by them, right? Or it's refunded to the buyer, right? Now, I say there's no argument, but can you make an argument? You certainly, you always can, right? Because let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, who controls the earnest money once it's been deposited? The listing company does. The seller's agent has a lot of control over it, and they can hold that over the head of the buyer's agent, right? And the buyer, okay? But it goes both ways, right? So I had one of our agents called me and said, Zach, I got this deal. We can't get financing, so we need to cancel. I said, great. Which box did you check? Well, we checked box 1. Okay, great. Did you guys check the box to have it refunded to the buyer or to the seller? We had the box checked refunded to the buyer. So great. You're good to go. It's already decided. You guys already had this discussion when you originally negotiated the contract. You negotiated in this scenario what would happen. So the listing agent can bemoan all they want, but they have already agreed to what is to happen. If they had a misunderstanding or they didn't catch that, then they failed their seller. They can be as mad as they want to. Look, I'm making you squirm. I love it. We'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Yeah.
If it fails to close because the buyer cannot secure the financing, you've already agreed what's going to happen to the earnest money. All right. So what do you got? That's in theory. Let's talk real life.
In the real life, then the seller gets mad and the seller will not sign the cancellation.
That's fine. Read this language. Read this language.
That's it.
Hang on. Just let me say
Okay,
what I got to
sorry.
say, girl. We can go to town.
I'm all excited.
Good. It already says what should happen. Buyer and seller shall immediately sign a cancellation. So the seller will be going back on their word in that case. And let's get real for another minute because we think, oh, the seller has the power, they've got the earnest money. Well, guess what? If you fail to sign that cancellation and the buyer is not going to move forward on that property, is that home still under contract?
Yeah.
Until you have a signed cancellation, it is. So guess what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller? You can't put your property back on the market actively for sale without any contracts on it because technically it's under contract. So give me back my earnest money. I'll sign the cancellation and we can move and you can feel free to market your property again. Because quite frankly, you have to. You already agreed to. If you check the second box. Anyway, what do you
The
got?
seller will not sign.
Okay.
Their house is still pending. I sent the cancellation 2.5 weeks
Who do you
ago.
represent?
The buyer,
Okay. So what in your scenario, which boxes are checked?
refunded to the buyer.
Okay.
And so the seller absolutely will not sign it, and they don't care that their house is still pending.
That's fine.
And her broker will not release that earnest money because the seller has not signed that cancellation
Which company is it?
agreement.
Okay. So has our broker talked to their broker?
No.
Okay. That's the direction I'd go to next.
Okay. I'll do that today.
Because have you ever heard of the phrase statutory cancellation?
Yes,
Okay, so tell me, what is that? What's your understanding of it?
that's in this situation, exactly.
Yeah.
This is why, because I talked to Michelle about it,
Okay.
and Michelle said, when you have people who don't agree, that's what statutory cancellation is. But that involves the buyer hiring a lawyer, or some representation.
Or
And-
threatening to.
Or threatening to, and I tried that, didn't work. The seller went as far as saying, well, we want to know exactly the reasons why this guy can't get financing. So it's been bad, and the seller is really ornery. But I'll go talk to Bruce and
I would, because if you, at the end of the day, what you have to fall back on, the cards are in your favor. You know, if I have a scale and I'm weighting the balance between buyer and seller, this contract weights it in terms of favoring the buyer, especially if you have a lender that says we can't get them approved. We've tried. They have been denied, right? Sellers always hate hearing that. They want to say, well, we'll try this lender, go try this lender. Hey, at the end of the day, I can only try so many, and if I can't get the financing, we've already agreed as to what would happen. So here's the deal. I understand your frustration, but it should really be directed at your listing agent, because they had some options, and they should have walked and talked you through these options, and we could have negotiated changes, right? I'll be honest with you. When we submit offers for our buyers, we check box 2 and we put in a commitment letter date that's at least a week prior to closing. I don't even play that game, because it also holds the lender's feet to the fire to get the job done, and it makes our offer stronger, right? And we have some options that are in this language as well that we'll talk about. Okay, any other questions or thoughts on that? It's goofy, it's sticky. Nobody likes to be in that situation where one party wants to cancel and the other doesn't. We've got earnest money involved, because now, like, oh my God, what are we going to do? It's already covered in the PA. It's already there. That's why you have to know what you're getting into when you're signing off on those.
So if you mark box 2, then where does the earnest money go?
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Great question.
What's your smoke?
Yeah.
Did you get a letter from one lender for the
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the second box. Line 75, second box. Buyer shall provide seller or the seller's agent with a written statement on or before blank date. Written statement is pretty synonymous with the term commitment letter, right? Okay, and I usually, because back in the day when I was first writing these deals, I'd be like, I was just putting a date in there. I had no idea what that meant. I go, commitment letter, we'll get you one of those. Like, it sounds good. So my lender, the lender I kept using, like, Zach, do me a favor, give me more than just a week. I was like, oh, okay, now I know what that means. So now I do it, whatever the close date is, the date for the commitment letter is 1 week prior to. I give them all the way up until a week to closing to say we're good to go and give us a green light, right? Because if the lender does not meet that date, it can be a big deal, right? Okay.
Zach, would you,
Yes, sir.
like, say it's like a 60-day closing?
Okay.
Would you want to maybe have that
A little sooner.
like 45 days?
Yeah.
What's reasonable?
That's a good point. If it's not a turn and burn closing, if, like Todd said, if we're going to be 60 out, I might choose a commitment letter date that's sooner than a week out, right? Just to make sure that our ducks are in a row, so to speak. No pun intended. Okay, so we put whatever date in there that makes sense for that particular transaction. Line 77. For the purposes of this contingency, written statement means a written statement prepared by the buyer's mortgage originator or lender after the final acceptance date that the buyer is approved for the loan specified in this purchase agreement, including the first mortgage and any supporting financing, and stating that an appraisal satisfactory to the lender has been completed, and stating conditions required by the lender to close the loan, right? So the idea behind the commitment letter is, hey, we're good. They've more or less kind of been through underwriting, appraisal is good, and we really don't have any significant conditions that are going to prevent us from closing. Right? And that's kind of the behind the commitment letter. It's really the lender saying, hey, we're good to go on our end. Closing is going to be solid. In theory, upon delivery of the written statement or the commitment letter to the seller or their agent, the obligation for satisfying all conditions required by the mortgage originator or the lender, except the conditions specified below, are deemed accepted by the buyer. The buyer is saying, hey, we're going to make it happen. These are the exceptions. Any work orders agreed to be completed by the seller. If the seller agreed to work orders and they're not completed in time to closing, so the buyer can't get financing, well then, hey, that's a get out of jail free card for the buyer, right? Any other financing terms agreed to be completed by the seller. Okay, the seller, if you're not holding up your end of the deal, then this whole, commitment letter requirement kind of goes by the wayside. Any contingency for the sale and closing of the buyer's property, right? We'll get into that again later in the purchase agreement. But if the sale is contingent upon my property selling and closing, and all of a sudden it explodes right before closing, well, hey, that's a pretty big game changer that you could argue was not foreseeable, right? So that would change this. Upon delivery of the written statement, if the purchase agreement does not close on the stated date for any reason relating to financing, including but not limited to interest rate and discount points, if any, then the seller may, at the seller's discretion, declare the purchase agreement canceled. Buyer and seller shall immediately sign a cancellation, confirming the said cancellation, and directed all earnest money be paid here to be forfeited to the seller as liquidated damages. Let me read that again. Upon delivery of the written statement, if this purchase agreement does not close on the close date for any reason related to financing, then the seller may, at their discretion, declare this purchase agreement canceled, in which case both parties have to sign it, and the earnest money is to be forfeited to the seller as liquidated damages. So let me ask you a couple questions about that language. Is this saying that if the buyer fails to meet the commitment letter date, if the lender fails to deliver the commitment letter date, that the purchase agreement is automatically canceled?
No.
That
It's
is-
saying
that
if
is
they
not what
give
it's
you the
saying.
letter and it doesn't close.
Well, we'll get to that, actually. This is saying if that commitment letter date, if the buyer and the lender don't meet that requirement, if we don't get you that letter by that date, it's not automatically canceled. But what the seller can do is say, we're canceled, and I get to keep your earnest money. Right? It's not saying the seller has to cancel. It's saying the seller now has the option to do so and keep their earnest money. Right? So let's play this out with some real life scenarios. Okay? Let's say I'm doing a deal with Todd. Todd reps the buyer, I represent the listing agent. The commitment letter date comes and goes. I call Todd, I say, Todd, hey, here's the deal, man. I kind of wasn't tracking this, maybe you weren't either. The commitment letter was actually due yesterday. You know, can you get on the horn with your lender and see if you can't get something going? Todd says, yeah, let me talk to him, calls me back. Hey, I talked to the lender, we all missed it, sorry, you'll have it by today and I get it. Right, is that a big deal? No, we're good. I feel okay about that. I'm fine with that, right? So here's the next question. I called Todd and said, Todd, here's the deal. We missed a commitment letter date. Or this is how my team actually operates as both a buying agent and a listing agent. When we're a week out from the commitment letter date, we're calling the lender. Hey, just a reminder, your commitment letter is due in a week. Do you foresee any issues? Hey, just a reminder, commitment letter is due in a couple of days. Are we going to get that to the seller, or are we going to be expecting that? Like, we're prompting them for it, okay? So now, I'm a listing agent. The date comes and goes. I don't have the commitment letter. I call Todd and say, hey, Todd, what's the deal? Because let me talk to my lender. He calls me back later and says, hey, here's the deal, man. I just talked to the lender. I guess there were a couple of hiccups when it came to financing. And we're actually, probably looking at maybe delaying closing by a week or two. I can say, Todd, I appreciate you letting me know. Let me have a conversation with my sellers. What can my sellers now do if they choose, if they want to? You call back and say, Todd, hey man, my bad. I tried to keep this together, but the sellers, they feel like this thing is too shaky. We're canceling, and oh, by the way, based on how the purchase agreement is written, we're going to keep that earnest money as forfeited damages because you guys failed to get us a commitment letter on time.
So it's not upon delivery.
Come again?
It's not upon delivery where the earnest money becomes forfeited to the seller.
But let's read it one more time. Upon delivery of the written statement, if this purchase agreement does not close, oh, hang on, Todd. That was a good clarification. Upon delivery of the written statement, okay.
Right.
You did a good
We didn't
clarification.
get we
No,
didn't get
no,
the
The seller.
Well, because Todd, I'm describing a different situation.
Right.
Good catch, Todd. So if Todd and his lender give me a written statement and it still doesn't close, we're keeping the earnest money, right? You did the right thing. You got me a commitment letter, but it basically proved to be useless, right? Because you still didn't close. So the seller's going to do what?
Keep it.
Keep it.
Cancel.
Right. Do they have to keep it?
No.
No. It's going to be a sticky situation, and everybody's going to hem and haw. We could refund it. We could partially split it. There's all kinds of things that we could do, right? Okay. It also says seller may seek all other remedies allowed by law. Now, if we go to the other page, it continues to talk about the commitment letter.
Not to get hung up on this, so.
Yep.
So say you were late on the commitment letter due
Yep.
date.
Yep.
And it took another day, or you guys agreed to. At that point, because you didn't give them the letter on that date, does not forfeit their earnest money.
Right.
We're going to talk about that one next.
Okay.
We're going to talk about the other scenario, and then I'll recap both of them. Okay, so let's continue on to a little bit of follow-on from the last scenario. Notwithstanding the language in the preceding paragraph, the seller may not declare this purchase agreement canceled if the purchase agreement does not close and was due to the seller's failure to complete work orders, the seller's failure to complete anything that was agreed upon, and other contingencies. So if it fails to close, if the seller basically stalls and kind of, makes it not close because they want to keep that earnest money, then that counteracts their ability to keep it as damages. Does that make sense? So let's talk about the second scenario. If the written statement is not provided, by the date specified on line 76, the seller may, at the seller's option, declare the purchase agreement canceled by written notice to the buyer or their agent, in which case the purchase agreement is canceled. In the event the seller declares this purchase agreement canceled, buyer and seller shall immediately sign the cancellation. If the written statement is not provided and the seller has not previously canceled the purchase agreement, this purchase agreement is canceled. Buyer and seller shall immediately sign the cancellation and all earnest money refunded to the buyer. Right, so let's talk about the two different scenarios in layman's terms, not necessarily in contractual terms. So there's two scenarios, okay? Scenario one is, I just failed to get you the commitment letter by the time in which I should get it to you, right? Scenario two is, we provide you with the commitment letter by the date we said we were supposed to, but for whatever reason, and not due to the seller's fault, it doesn't close, right? Well, the outcomes regarding the earnest money are already kind of pre-agreed to based on this language in both of those scenarios, okay? And the seller has options based on both of those scenarios, okay? If you fail to deliver the commitment letter on time, the seller can say, hey, the next day we're done, I'm canceling. But what's the trade-off for the buyer? They get their earnest money back. Hey, we failed to get you the commitment letter. Now the seller can choose to cancel if they want to. Earnest money comes back to the buyer, right? That's basically just allowing the seller to move on, okay? The second scenario, hey, no, we gave you the commitment letter, so the seller's feeling good about this deal, and now all of a sudden we're being told, actually, we're just a couple days out from closing and we're not going to close. Now what does the seller get to do? And now it's already agreed upon that under this situation, the seller can keep the earnest money as forfeited damages, right? Or if it fails to close. Does that make sense? Okay, what questions do you have?
Well, what's the difference in marking box 1 and then marking box 2
Exactly.
and they don't give you the letter?
Exactly.
I mean, to me, there's no difference.
Right.
So,
Well, box two is way more attractive from the standpoint of the listing agent, right? But you're still safeguarded as a buyer if you don't get that commitment letter in time,
right.
right? The only difference is the seller can choose to cancel it on you like that. So let's talk about real life situations and how this usually plays out. Usually, Todd and I are in good communication. Let's say that Todd's a listing agent now, I'm the buyer's agent. I've been talking to my lender, hey man, we got a commitment letter that's due, it's gonna be due, it's gonna be due, it's gonna be due. And he says, hey, here's the deal, man. My underwriters are driving me nuts. There's like one last thing I need cleared up. It's not gonna happen till a day or two. Could you talk to the other agent and see if they're willing to work with you on that? Let me call Todd. Todd, here's the deal, man. I talked with the lender myself. They're promising me this is the issue. They foresee that it's gonna be resolved in the next day or two. Are you guys okay with us maybe being a little bit late on a commitment letter, or can we do an amendment that changes the date regarding that commitment letter? They'll say, well, let me run past my sellers, right? They come back to us and they say, hey, that's fine, we'll give you a couple extra days. Has that happened before? Absolutely, it happens all the time. What can throw a huge wrench regarding the timeline of your commitment letter? What has to? Appraisal. Your appraisal could throw a huge wrench into that timeline. Right, so you might have to say, here's the deal. As a result of all these conditions that came about resulting from the appraisal, we're actually going to have to go ahead and push the date of the commitment letter to the right a little bit. Let's go ahead and agree to that in an amendment ahead of time. Because most oftentimes we think we're going to be dealing with reasonable people, right? And if we've learned anything in real estate, is that not everybody's reasonable, right? Because you would think if I could call Todd and explain to his sellers they're going to have it just one day late, you'd think that most people, if they're reasonably satisfied with the reasoning behind it, they'd say, that's fine, right? But in this kind of market, sellers tend to get somewhat, what?
Irrational.
Irrational and or what?
Ornery.
Ornery, as we say in Iowa, not ornery. Or what else? Cocky or, I'm looking for the word, greedy. That's the thing, Karen. I'm looking for the word greedy. Right? Sellers are all about how much money I can get. My property selling like hotcakes. We went under contract a month and a half ago. What What have they been seeing happen over the last month and a half to 2 months?
Prices go up.
They've been seeing prices go up. They've been seeing homes sell for even more. So like, hey, guess what? We've got to get out of jail free card. We can cancel that. Oh, by the way, you know that Zach guy who's been calling us day after day asking if this deal is going to fall apart because he has a strong backup offer? Well, guess what? It sounds like I might want to talk to this guy now, and I would have a legitimate reason to cancel. Todd, you're going to be late by a day on your commitment letter. That's cool. We're canceling. Keep your earnest money. We're going to switch to our backup offer, which nets us $5,000 more. That's why knowing and understanding the language in these PAs and how these different scenarios play out is extremely important. 9 times out of 10, a seller's going to say that's fine. We'll give you the extra day or two. But that other, 1 out of 10 times, they're going to say, actually, no, we've got a better deal waiting, and we're just going to go with it. So that's why getting those commitment letters is absolutely crucial. Any questions on that? Any thoughts on that? Any real life examples or scenarios? Okay, good. We're going to keep moving down page 3. And you'll notice that because our financing addendums are all combined into this one PA, that now we have things like lender commitment work orders in the actual purchase agreement. You'll notice the FHA escape clause is in there. It says just FHA financing only, and then lender processing fees. So, in all those financing addendums, we'd always ask for those extra onesies and twosies for the seller to pre-agree to stuff that you didn't even know if it was going to happen or not. It's all embedded in here, and you can either continue to fill it out in the same way that you always have, or you potentially change it, whatever you want. Okay? I actually personally think it's probably good to have it all under one umbrella. It makes some parts of the purchase agreement not relevant, like, hey, if we're using conventional financing, we've got all this FHA language in here. That can be confusing, right? That's one potential drawback to putting all these different financing languages into one purchase agreement is, hey man, well, I'm using conventional financing, but I read something about an escape clause in here. Well, that does not apply to you. Well, why not? Right? So we have to be 100% clear with people when we're explaining these documents, what applies and what doesn't based on the financing that they're utilizing, right? Whereas before, if we were going to use conventional or FHA or DVA, that's all that I talked about with you when we did that addendum. But now, unfortunately, it's all in here, so that has a potential to be confusing to consumers. Yeah. So FHA escape clause, it's still the same language. You add the price in there if you want to. Lender processing fees, you can choose to put anything in there if you want to. Move on to page 4. This is where if you're going to use a VA loan, you would put that in there. Okay. And again, the DVA escape clause is in there. So the takeaway is, if you're going to use conventional financing, and if you're like me and you still like to have the escape clause in there, and you purposely write it in manually on all of your conventional financing addendums, well, now you still have to add that escape clause for conventional financing. You just have to make sure that you pen it in on the actual purchase agreement now. Does that make sense?
Where would you put it now? Would you put it right there? On
I'd
155?
probably put it in right in here. One
Is that
sentence.
right? Like an appraisal?
Yeah, it basically says this, if the home fails to appraise for the contract sale price or greater, buyer and seller agree, or the buyer reserves the right to cancel the purchase agreement and have earnest money refunded to them, right? So it's very important how we structure that. If it fails to appraise at or above contract sale price, right, buyer reserves the right, I either put buyer reserves the right to cancel or renegotiate and receive their earnest money back, right? Because here's the deal, you don't want to write it to automatically cancel, right? Because your buyer might still want to move forward, or they might want to get creative, or they might want to renegotiate, right? But if you say, hey, if it doesn't appraise, you automatically cancel, well then technically you just left all other options off the table. Versus, hey, we reserve the right to cancel and or renegotiate, right? That means if it's a $10,000 difference, well, hey, maybe the seller's covering 5 and we're covering 5, or they're doing some and we're doing all, and whatnot. You leave yourself some flexibility there, and also you protect yourself to say, hey, $30,000 discrepancy. Hey, we built in there the right to cancel and get our earnest money back. I'm making up a $30,000 difference. I like the house, but I don't like it that much. Right? Yes, sir.
So am I not proper to write it as this purchase agreement is contingent upon the home appraising for on or above the purchase price?
You'll notice some of that contingent language is already sort of built into some of the financing terms, but I make it completely like clear as day. If it fails to appraise for contract sale price or greater, the buyer has the right to do these things, right? So there's no issue. You're probably okay doing it the way you're doing it, Todd. The big takeaway is for your conventional buyers, it's probably good practice to do something. And here's why. I know I get to take care of it. Because I had a lender early on in my days tell me, here's the deal. This is why the escape clause is important. It's built into FHA, it's built into DBA, it's not built into conventional. So God forbid there's a $30,000 discrepancy and we check your bank account and you've got 50 extra grand sitting in there. What in theory can the sellers force you to do? They can force you to tap into that 50 grand to cover the difference because you can still close. And if you don't close and you don't have an escape clause built in there, you would be violating the contract. Yeah, I can see Renee like, what is going on?
Say that again, I wasn't listening.
Oh, what? That's even worse. No, just
Sorry,
kidding. No, that's okay. That's
Say it
okay.
again.
I'm using conventional financing. There's no escape clause built in there for you. There's a $30,000 difference on the appraised value versus the contract sale price. And I've got an extra 50 grand sitting in the bank that could be used to close that gap.
But here's the thing.
Oh, let me finish. Now I'll get to it. In theory, they could say, dude, we have a mutually binding contract. You've agreed to purchase a property under these terms. Your lender is saying you can still qualify for it. And you've got the funds to close it. So you have to tap into those funds and close on the property. Otherwise, you're violating your contract.
What lender would do that?
Yeah.
You'd be surprised, because here's the deal, Leanne. As soon as I find out about the appraisal on the listing agent, I'm calling the lender. I'm saying, hey, do they still have the ability to close? We all know people say things that they shouldn't.
Right. They're dumb. They're not very brilliant.
Not all. Megan used to be one.
I know. I'm not saying them all in general.
But I tell you, I go, when I'm the listing agent, I establish a direct line of communication with that lender all day long, and I butter them up because what do they want from me in return? They want business, right? So I'm asking them all kinds of questions about their person. Hey, are they strong? And sometimes they say, oh, this person's strong, they have tons of cash stashed away. That's all I need to know. Or Leanne, if I ask you this question, hey, Miss Martin, you're the lender for this buyer. I know there's an appraisal gap. I'm asking you, can this buyer still perform and close on this? That's a yes or no question.
Maybe.
That's a yes, yeah. You know what I mean? So you have to build that escape language in there.
You really should do
For
that.
conventional, you should put it in, it should be standard practice to add that language in there. It's up to you.
So say you're just straight contingent upon financing, box one, for funded to buyer. Technically, wouldn't the home appraising be contingent upon the financing?
Todd, yes, everything's contingent upon finance.
And I know there's not.
No, let me give you,
Side, but it's still.
Todd, let me give you a scenario. I'm buying a home for, let's say I'm buying a home for $350,000, right? Let's say I've been very, very good with my money. I got $200,000 liquid cash in bank accounts, right? So let's say I'm only putting 20% down though, because I don't want to use all that liquid cash. The appraisal comes back instead of $350 at $340. Let me ask you, Todd, do I still qualify for financing?
Yeah.
I do. So that contingency, it's not wiped out because it didn't appraise, because technically I still qualify for financing to purchase the home. Right? The FHA, the way that language is written, doesn't automatically say, hey, no appraisal, you don't pass go.
Yeah.
Right? The conventional says, well, if you can still perform, we'll still finance you.
Yeah.
You just got to come up with money to cover the, oh, by the way, we know you do, because we've examined all your bank accounts.
Well,
We know you've got an extra 50 grand sitting there that you can use to close a $10,000 gap and still move forward. So you're still approved. You still have financing from us. It's just not for the same amount.
Better buy some stock that quick.
Yeah, but there are things you could do, like you could purposely go finance a car or something, which might trigger and make you no longer qualify, right?
Right.
But that's a whole other rabbit hole. what I'm telling you is, the big takeaway is, and a lot of people don't realize it, the reason why we purposely should be putting that conventional escape clause language in the contract is because, God forbid, there are more, we just helped a guy, he pinged off of our website. Super nice guy, was buying like a little townhome, twin home for $150,000. He's buying it for somebody basically because they hit a rough patch in their life. She was a single mom, had kids. He bought it all cash just so she had a place to live. He sent me proof of funds. The dude was a millionaire. You would have never guessed, right? If he chose to buy with conventional and he doesn't have an escape clause in there, and the appraisal comes back 10, 20 grand short, in theory, if everybody knows all the information available to know, they can say, no, dude, you're still buying that. We know you have the cash to do it.
And
What do you got?
we should put something out to everybody telling them if you finance conventionally because appraisals are coming back undervalued, you need to do an escape clause because I didn't know that.
Okay.
So
It's a good
I've
one.
never written an escape clause on a conventional financing addendum.
Well, then your trip for the team meeting was worthwhile today.
Well, yeah, a week late because I have exactly.
Well, but is it still moving forward, or are you guys dealing
Well,
with
I don't know
an issue?
yet. I'm waiting to see what my buyers are gonna do because they probably could still qualify.
Right,
We're
but
not
here's the
looking at
deal.
a 10 grand split,
Yeah.
but we're looking at enough of a split that it matters.
But so long as the other party doesn't necessarily know everything, you might still be able to negotiate a cancellation or have to make a difference.
I'm
Right.
a listing agent.
You two need to step out for a minute. Okay. Any other questions on that? Good discussion. Also, what's new in here that you'll now notice, seller contribution to buyer's closing costs, it's embedded in the PA. Okay, got it. It's kind of nice just to have it in there.
I love this.
Yeah.
I
kid.
do too.
Right, seriously. Seriously.
You don't have to-
Save me passions.
Right. Well, now
Did you
think
get your
about it.
inspection stuff back?
What's that?
Did you get your inspection stuff back?
What do you mean?
You did.
Oh, no, I'll tell you about it though. I'm gonna give you the language that I utilize. But it's kind of nice. I mean, if you're gonna go meet with somebody, you pretty much print yourself a purchase agreement. You have just about everything you need.
Yeah,
Right? You have just about everything you need, right?
yeah, except well, it's that.
Right. So that being said, those packets might disappear.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Get back to writing it on the hood of the car.
Yeah, there you go.
Here's my
Um,
napkin.
Yeah. So your inspection contingency, it's built into the PA, but I'm gonna highlight the language, and it's still the same language that they changed on us last time that I hate and I despise, but I'm gonna tell you how I counteract it. And it starts on line 184. All inspections, blah, 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 shall be done within blank days. Excuse me, blank calendar days of final acceptance. Okay, got that. So now we get to choose how many days, just one period, right? I would typically put in there 10, unless I want to shorten it up to be more competitive or something like that, but I'm typically putting 10. When I say I mean Carly. Line 190, if buyer does not cancel this purchase agreement before the end of the inspection period, then the inspection contingency shall be deemed removed and the purchase agreement shall be in full force and effect. That's a big deal. It's a big deal. I don't know what the thought process was behind that change. I disagree with it 110%, because it's not a good, it should automatically trigger a cancellation, in my humble opinion. And that's what it used to do. It used to say if buyer and seller don't come to terms or don't agree with the inspection stuff, blah, 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 and we hit that, we exceed our timeline, it's canceled. Right, but now it's saying, hey, if the buyer doesn't cancel or what have you, if the sellers just ride this out, if the sellers don't even respond, it's just removed. Buyer's locked in.
But that's how it was before. You had certain
That's what I'm
days responding to each, but if you had the home inspection done when you represented the buyer and they didn't want any changes and you did absolutely nothing, it would go away and it went pending. That inspection was just removed.
Or
It timed out, basically, just the same as this.
I don't have the same recollection. I'll put it that way. Or maybe we're just miscommunicating.
It was just that you had, the buyer had to get back to the seller within this many days, and then the seller had to get back within this many days if there were any changes or anything that you wanted to have done. If you never did any of that, it just proceeded to pending.
Well, but it didn't automatically lock the buyer in. The buyer's always had some sort of out, right?
Well, they still do, they can cancel it.
We're not,
They have that option
let's say it's the
then.
last day and I send you a cancellation and you don't get it back to me. What just happened? The buyer just bought a property, it's now pending. That's
So
a,
if the
that's a
seller
booby trap,
doesn't, if
in
the
my
seller
opinion.
doesn't sign a cancellation,
This-
even though the buyer has sent
Worst case
it,
scenario, worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, the buyer sends over, we go to day 9.5, noon, and send over the cancellation, can't come to an agreement. Sellers, for whatever reason, either choose not to sign, they're gone, they're out of town, something happened. Well, the way this contract is written is, hey, if we don't have a signed cancellation, the buyer is locked in, the contingency is removed, you're pending, you purchased the property. I agree,
yeah.
I agree, so here's what we do.
Write it in.
That's what I do. On lines 194 to 197, we basically add language that completely negates that. It basically says, hey, if by the end of the timeline identified on page 184, both the buyers and the sellers have not agreed to the inspection items or come to a successful negotiation, this purchase agreement is automatically canceled. Buyer and seller to immediately sign a cancellation. Right? Protect your people, add that language in there. Hey, here's the deal. If we do not reach a mutual agreement by the end of these days, they were just canceled. It's done. Right?
Okay,
Because strategically, from a seller standpoint, you could just go radio silent.
right.
You could
That's
go radio
wrong.
silent, or God forbid, and this happened. My mom was a listing agent. Buyer agent just completely missed the date. Guess what? You have a property now. So wait, we got all these requests. No, I hate to break it to you. Your time has passed. You're locked in. But wait, we want to ask for this, and this. No. You're not understanding me. Your time for that is done.
You lose.
You're
And that
locked
part I
in.
think is okay, because the buyer, or the buyer's agent, you're writing that up. You're supposed to be aware of the timeline.
Absolutely.
So,
And that was my mom's response.
Yeah.
Hey, I get it. I understand they're mad. They shouldn't be mad at us. They should be mad at you.
Right.
And guess what? There was some money involved in that. That's a big deal, right? So add that language. Add that language for your buyers. I've been adding it since day one. I've not received any kickback. If anything, people have stolen and duplicated it, right? Because here's what I love about these forms. You can add and make changes to them. If you don't like something, if you see a void or something needs fixing, put the language in there that fixes it. And if everybody signs off on it, you're good, right? Okay. Sale of buyer's property. Now, this is a change that occurred last time. We're all relatively familiar with it. Basically, we've got three options. Hey, it's either contingent to, scroll down here, I'm getting too excited. Before, this was a little bit not as transparent. Now they've tried to add a lot more transparency to it. Hey, this purchase agreement is subject to a property actually selling, or it's subject to a property actually closing, or neither, right? I don't have to sell or close another property, because the general public does not understand it this way, but we do know there's a difference. Is there a difference between a property being sold and a property being closed?
Yes.
What's the difference?
Once under contract.
Yeah, sold means, hey, that's paperwork. It's just under contract. That's sold, but you're not yet closed. And until you close on that property and free up the equity that you need to put on your down payment for the next one, but we need to know that, right? So it just makes it more transparent. And then we start getting back into the normal language that we're used to seeing in the PA, right? We're getting into taxes, prorated, not prorated. Marketable title. Let me make sure there's something else I want to cover. Possession, yep, got it. All this extra mumbo jumbo, got it. Calculation, business days, okay, I understand. Disclosures, yep, got it. Septic, well, home warranty, who are the agents involved? Really no changes there. That should all look familiar to you. Dual agency, FERPA stuff, that was new last time, okay. Then we have this page, and toward the bottom, something new that's a little different. Right. Hey, oh, by the way, should there be the need for any of the following addenda, check the box.
Oh,
Hence, no longer needing to page number everything. right? Before it was, okay, pages 1 through 7, back when there were only 7 pages. Okay, and then we're gonna have the financing addendum, so that's pages 8 and 9. Then we've got, okay, inspection contingency, okay, so that's, okay, that must be 10 and 11. Okay, we're not playing that game anymore. You got your purchase agreement, and in the purchase agreement, we are identifying what addenda also go with it and belong to it. And then when you look at the addenda, it says pertaining to the property at this address, right? Okay, so, but here's the question I don't know. Well, what if we remove one of those addenda? How do we show that it no longer pertains to the contract? We have to figure some of that stuff out, right? So that's,
Put a color offering together and say removing.
you certainly could. You certainly could. Yep. I would probably go back and initial some sort of change on this page too, though. And then we get to the last page, which is again, pretty much the same. I want to ask one more question, and that's about arbitration, because there's been some confusion about this bottom portion here. So let me ask you this: do people have to sign arbitration?
No.
Okay, they don't. Is arbitration part of a purchase agreement?
No.
No, it's not. Arbitration is a form that is completely separate. So what are we asking people when they sign right here? Are we saying, hey, do you agree to arbitration?
No.
That's not what we're asking.
No.
This says, all this says is, hey, my agent has gone over or introduced to me or showed me the arbitration form. Whether or not we choose to sign it or decline it should be reflected on the arbitration form. This
Well,
doesn't.
didn't they add this because you're not supposed to write waived? I mean, it used to be people who
I write
rescinded or they
declined.
wrote waived or declined and you're not supposed to do that anymore, which means you
No,
could end up with a blank.
what would happen is there just wouldn't be a form at all. So now if you don't do a form, well, now as an agent, it protects us. We can at least go back and say, well, no, we did introduce them to the form. They signed here saying they saw it. They chose not to partake in arbitration, or arbitration it's not in effect for this transaction. That's why one doesn't exist, but we certainly went over it with them. Right? I still like to hedge my bets, and if they don't agree to it, I put decline and I had them initial next to it because they can't argue that I went over it with them and that they declined it. That makes sense?
You do that on the actual arbitration.
On the actual arbitration
Okay,
form.
not here.
See, I
Not
think
here.
we were told not to do that. I think Michelle told us not to do that.
I do. I just told you a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Any questions? Good stuff?
Yeah,
Yeah,
really good
sort of.
stuff.
All right, so that's what's coming down the pipeline. Start embracing this come August. If you have questions about it, though, just ask us, right? It's, we all need to learn together. I mean, I'm still learning it. This was a good experience for me. I had to read it so I could help share it with you. Like I said before, Bruce and Kelly throughout the month of August will be teaching more classes on it and stuff like that. But don't be a jerk when you're out there doing transactions with other agents and they maybe have the outdated forms. Just say, hey, here's the deal. Maybe you didn't realize this or you haven't heard about it yet. There are new forms, and my broker requires that, August going forward, we use the new forms. So, yeah. So we appreciate your offer. I'll certainly kind of start conversations with my sellers about the terms, but do me a favor, and first chance you get, resubmit it to me on the new updated form so that it's proper, right? But if you have stuff in the works right now, this or the other, that's fine. Keep using what you have, but come August, you need to switch over. When they come out, get in Flex, look at all the new ones. We'll do a better job of highlighting some of the more changes that have occurred as well for you, so you got it. But other than that, that's all I've got for you. Just a reminder that the AOC meeting will kick off at 12:15 right here. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
And by the way, if you want to work for a great broker,